Welcome back to The Shadows. Before we uncover tonight's archived file, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never get lost in the dark. The faded blue folder designated as Case File 89B had sat inside the lower drawer of the Ironwood Peak Evidence Vault for 32 long years without ever being officially cataloged. It did not exist on the county's modern digital network, nor was it listed in the official memorial register for state officers lost in the line of duty. To the state police department, the strange events of October 1994 were officially categorized as a localized structural fire resulting in the total loss of Precinct Station 4. However, the physical evidence contained within the surviving iron safe told a vastly different story, one preserved in damp crime scene photographs, yellowed coroner transcripts, and 3 pristine spools of magnetic reel-to-reel tape. Lead Detective Marcus Vance had spent 6 grueling months quietly reviewing the cold case files of the Great Lakes Rust Belt before he uncovered the severe anomalies surrounding the sudden death of Arthur Sterling. Sterling had been a senior night shift dispatcher, a calm, reliable veteran who had worked the midnight hours at Station 4 for well over 2 decades. On the foggy morning of October 14, 1994, the day shift officers arrived at the precinct to find the heavy steel door of the dispatch booth locked tightly from the inside with an internal deadbolt. When the maintenance crew forcibly removed the rusted hinges, they found Sterling sitting perfectly upright in his high-backed leather chair, his heavy headset still adjusted over his ears, his hands resting naturally on the wooden console. There were no visible marks of physical violence on his pale body, no signs of forced entry into the bulletproof glass enclosure, and no toxic substances detected in his bloodstream. According to the preliminary autopsy performed by the reluctant county coroner, Sterling's heart had simply stopped beating at approximately 2 o'clock in the morning. What made Case File 89B an unhandled entity, however, was the portable Nagra tape recorder sitting quietly on the edge of Sterling's desk. The heavy machine was plugged directly into the station's main audio feed, its magnetic spools turning slowly as it played a continuous, localized loop into the silence. When the investigating officers first played the tape, they did not hear simple static or the ambient noise of a quiet night shift. They heard Arthur Sterling's distinct voice, speaking in a flat, unhurried monotone, describing his own physical demise in minute, terrifying detail. On the recording, Sterling narrated the exact sensation of his lungs failing, the precise second his pulse ceased, and the cold stillness settling over the room. Most horrifying of all was the precise timestamp embedded in the audio reel. The recording had been captured between 3 and 4 in the morning, more than an hour after the medical examiner declared that Arthur Sterling had clinically ceased to exist. Marcus Vance sat in his dim office, the cold rain tapping against the window pane as he stared at the transcribed audio logs resting before him. The official report noted that the case was closed due to natural causes, but the magnetic tape remained locked away, silent proof that something unnatural had inhabited Precinct Station for that night. Every detail in the folder hinted at an unaccounted presence that had guided Sterling's pen and voice long after his heart had ceased to beat. Vance adjusted his coat, the weight of 32 years of silence pressing heavily against his mind as he prepared to dig deeper into the forgotten archive. The long drive to the abandoned ruins of Station 4 took Detective Marcus Vance through 3 miles of completely unlit pine forest along the perimeter of the old industrial canal. Rain fell in continuous, heavy curtains, slate-gray water washing endlessly across the glass windshield of his unmarked cruiser as he navigated the rutted gravel road. The precinct building stood as a towering dark silhouette against the stormy night sky, its scorched brick facade overgrown with wild ivy, its boarded-up windows staring out like blind eyes into the timber thicket. Marcus pulled his vehicle into the overgrown gravel parking lot, killing the headlights and allowing his tired eyes to adjust to the dense gloom. He carried a heavy waterproof flashlight and a portable reel-to-reel deck in a reinforced leather casing, stepping out into the freezing autumn rain. The heavy padlock on the basement access door had rusted through over decades, yielding to the force of his crowbar with a sharp metallic snap that echoed loudly into the wet woods. Descending the narrow concrete stairs into the subterranean evidence vault, Marcus felt the air temperature plummet instantly, his breath forming thick clouds of white vapor in the beam of his flashlight. The damp basement smelled of cold concrete, wet soot, and the dry metallic scent of decaying paper archives that had somehow survived the fire 30 years prior. At the far end of the long storage corridor, behind a reinforced steel door marked with faded police scene tape, stood the original iron safe containing the master reels of case file 89B. Marcus unlocked the dial using the combination noted in the confidential ledger, pulling the heavy door open to reveal 3 metal canisters wrapped in thick, oily paper. He placed the first spool onto his portable deck, threading the brown magnetic tape through the transport heads with cold, deliberate fingers. As he pressed the mechanical play lever down, the speaker emitted a low, continuous hiss of tape noise, accompanied by the faint, rhythmic ticking of a mechanical clock. Through the monitor speaker, Arthur Sterling's voice emerged from the static, clear, dry, and terrifyingly calm. "Subject is currently standing in Vault 3, the recorded voice murmured into the darkness, reciting words that had certainly not been spoken 32 years ago. Subject Marcus Vance is wearing a dark wool rain jacket. He is currently listening to the frequency." Marcus froze instantly, his hand suspended over the volume dial as a violent chill ran down his entire spine. Behind Sterling's voice on the magnetic tape, a secondary sound began to emerge from the background noise, the distinct, rhythmic clacking of a heavy Underwood typewriter operating inside the empty room. Suddenly, the rusty wall-mounted landline phone on the basement pillar, disconnected from all external cables since 1994, began to ring with a sharp, brassy chime. The sound rang out again and again, shattering the silence of the subterranean vault and sending a wave of dread through the cold room. Marcus Vance grabbed the heavy plastic receiver off the damp wall cradle, pulling the coiled black cord taut against his hand. He pressed the cold metal casing against his ear, listening through a dense, pulsating layer of high-frequency static. A sharp electrical tone hit his eardrum, followed immediately by the rhythmic sound of mechanical keys violently striking paper. No living voice spoke from the other end of the line. Instead, the receiver carried an eerie 2-second delayed loop of Marcus's own heavy, ragged breathing, played back through the speaker cup with unsettling fidelity. Marcus slammed the heavy receiver back onto the metal hook. The brass bell fell silent, but the metallic clacking of the typewriter did not stop. It grew steadily louder, echoing from the far end of the gloomy storage hallway. Marcus unholstered his service weapon, thumbing the mechanical safety off as he stepped past the open iron safe. He swept the bright beam of his flashlight down the narrow concrete corridor, tracking a bundle of thick black communications cables that ran along the ceiling joists. The wires entered the outer wall of the old dispatch booth, the exact room where Arthur Sterling had died 32 years ago. The heavy steel door remained shut, its internal deadbolt locked securely within the reinforced frame. Marcus drove his shoulder hard against the central panel, testing the rusted hinges. The metal frame groaned under the pressure, shedding flakes of red rust onto the wet concrete floor. He stepped back into the corridor, raised his right boot, and kicked the timber frame right next to the lock mechanism. The dry oak trim splintered on the third impact, allowing the heavy door to swing inward with a sharp metallic screech. He stepped into the booth with his weapon raised, sweeping the flash beam systematically across the dust-filled room. Green metal filing cabinets lined the rear wall, their drawers bent open and rusted shut over decades. On the central desk sat a heavy electric typewriter, its thick rubber power cord severed completely and lying on the floor beside the legs. Despite having no electrical connection, the metal carriage moved rapidly back and forth, its mechanical arms striking the roller in violent, rhythmic bursts. Marcus walked up to the desk, aiming his light directly at the paper feeding through the platen. The machine typed out full sentences without stopping. Detective Vance breached the dispatch door at 2:14 a.m. He raised his sidearm. He observed the typewriter at 2:16 a.m. Marcus reached down, grabbed the margin of the yellowed paper, and yanked it violently out of the roller. The internal gears ground together with a harsh screech, spitting out a spray of black ink across the keys before locking in place. Marcus turned the sheet over, shining his light onto the upper half of the document. The text was an official shift log dated October 13, 1994, the night prior to Arthur Sterling's death. The log listed 5 patrol officers who had entered the precinct basement to investigate a noise in the storage vaults. The document noted that all 5 officers failed to return to the surface level, yet no search teams were ever dispatched. Below their names, a handwritten note in red ink read, "The recording requires 5 channels to balance the signal." Marcus shoved the document into his jacket pocket and stepped back toward the filing cabinets. He unclipped his crowbar from his belt, jamming the flat edge into the seam of the top drawer, leveraging his weight until the steel latch snapped. Inside sat 5 identical cassette tapes, each labeled with an officer's badge number and sealed in clear plastic evidence bags. He pulled out the first cassette, checking the magnetic ribbon inside the plastic shell. The tape was completely blank on side A, but side B was covered in fine black dust. He reached back into the drawer to retrieve the remaining 4 tapes, placing them inside his leather specimen pouch. As he sealed the pouch, the portable reel-to-reel deck he had left in the corridor outside began to play on its own. The audio monitor emitted a loud burst of static, followed by the sound of heavy footsteps walking across glass. Marcus turned toward the open doorway, raising his gun and flashlight together. Before he could take a single step, the heavy steel door of the dispatch booth slammed shut on its hinges. The internal deadbolt slid home with a loud, mechanical click that vibrated through the steel frame. Marcus lunged forward, twisting the chrome handle, but the latch remained locked solid. From the other side of the reinforced glass window, Marcus heard the distinct sound of heavy boots walking up to the counter, followed by the soft click of a tape recorder button being engaged. Marcus lunged for the steel door again, grabbing the cold chrome handle with both hands and twisting it with all his strength. The heavy deadbolt remained locked firmly in place, completely unyielding against the reinforced steel frame. He turned toward the observation window, raising his heavy tactical flashlight to strike the double-paned reinforced glass with violent force. The thick glass cracked into a dense spiderweb pattern on the 3rd blow, but the strong wire mesh embedded inside the pane held the structure together. On the other side of the cracked glass, the dark hallway remained entirely empty, yet the clear sound of human breathing echoed through the booth's internal intercom speaker. The wall-mounted intercom crackled to life with a sharp burst of high-frequency static, its red indicator light glowing dimly in the dark. Arthur Sterling's cold voice returned, speaking through the small metal speaker with a flat, mechanical clarity. "Channel 1 complete," the voice stated softly into the room. "Channel 2 complete. Channel 3 complete. Channel 4 complete. Channel 5 complete." The speaker emitted 5 distinct audio tones in rapid succession, each tone matching the pitch of a human voice speaking a single syllable. "Channel 6 initializing." Sterling's voice continued over the speaker. "Subject Marcus Vance has entered the capture perimeter. Signal lock established at 2:22 a.m. Marcus backed away from the window, sweeping his flashlight beam down beneath the central wooden desk. The floorboards under the desk were rotted through, revealing a narrow utility crawl space where the main communication cables dropped into the concrete foundation. Marcus dropped to his knees, unbuckling his heavy equipment belt and shoving his leather evidence pouch into the dark opening first. He holstered his Glock 17, squeezed his shoulders into the narrow gap, and pulled himself down into the dark crawl space beneath the precinct floor. The crawl space was barely 3 feet high, filled with damp gravel and thick bundles of black copper wire. Marcus crawled on his stomach, pushing his flashlight ahead as he followed the cable bundle deeper into the subterranean foundation. The crawl space sloped down at a sharp angle, ending in an open concrete doorway that led into a lower subbasement beneath Vault 3. It was a hidden room that did not appear on any of the precinct's official architectural blueprints. Marcus dropped 5 feet onto the cold concrete floor of the lower chamber, picking up his flashlight and retrieving his gear from the dust. The subbasement was vast and freezing cold, illuminated by the dim green glow of a long metal rack mounted against the far concrete wall. The rack held 6 massive industrial reel-to-reel tape decks, their heavy iron flywheels turning in slow synchronization. 5 of the decks were loaded with thick magnetic tape, their mechanical arms moving up and down as they recorded incoming audio signals. Each deck bore a metal label plate engraved with a police badge number matching the 5 missing officers from the 1994 incident report. The magnetic tape on those 5 reels was actively feeding through the recording heads, producing a continuous low hum that filled the room. Marcus walked up to the rack, his rubber boots clicking softly against the concrete floor. He stopped directly in front of the 6th tape deck at the far end of the frame. The brass reels on the machine were empty, but a fresh spool of brown magnetic tape sat on the loading tray beside the spindle. Etched into the metal label plate beneath the empty hub were fresh letters, carved deep into the steel. Vance, M. Badge 402. As Marcus reached out a hand to touch the cold metal label plate, the motorized spindle on the 6th deck began to spin rapidly on its own. The magnetic tape lifted off the tray, threading itself through the recording heads without human assistance, while the red record light clicked on with a sharp, audible pop. Through the monitor speaker mounted on the top of the rack, Marcus heard his own voice speaking from a recording that was currently being written onto the tape. The voice on the speaker described the exact room, the freezing air, and the sound of heavy footsteps approaching the iron door behind him. Marcus turned around slowly, drawing his sidearm as the heavy iron door of the subbasement began to unlatch from the outside with a deafening metallic screech. The heavy iron latch on the subbasement door swung upward with a sharp metallic clink. Marcus Vance pulled his Glock 17 into a low ready position, stepping 2 paces to the side of the central tape rack. The heavy double doors parted, revealing a tall figure framed against the dimly lit corridor behind it. The intruder wore the dark navy rain jacket, rubberized utility belt, and steel-toed boots of a 1994 state police patrol officer. The face beneath the vinyl cap was covered by a gray cloth dust mask, bound to the skull with thick wire straps. The figure did not raise a weapon or issue a verbal command. It stepped over the threshold, dragging its left heel across the concrete floor, and extended its right hand straight toward the control panel of the 6th tape deck. Marcus brought the front sight of his pistol onto the center of the intruder's chest. "State Police, freeze. Keep your hands visible," Marcus shouted into the dark. The figure ignored the verbal warning, taking another heavy step forward. Marcus fired 2 rounds into the center of the figure's jacket. The double tap struck the canvas material with 2 dull thuds. No blood emerged from the entry holes. Instead, thin streams of shredded brown magnetic tape spilled out of the torn fabric, cascading onto the concrete floor like dry ribbons. The impacts failed to disrupt the entity's forward movement. It reached the rack, grabbed the iron frame with its left hand, and pressed its right thumb onto the red recording toggle of the 6th reel. The spinning magnetic spools on the 6th deck accelerated instantly, emitting a high-pitched whine that vibrated through the metal casing. Marcus lunged forward, swinging his steel crowbar in a tight 2-handed arc. The flat iron head struck the intruder's right elbow, snapping the internal joint with a sharp mechanical crack. The arm dangled uselessly, exposing bundles of copper speaker wire and steel aircraft cable sparking inside the torn sleeve. Marcus reversed his grip on the tool, jamming the flat wedge beneath the main power distribution box mounted at the base of the tape rack. He put all his weight onto the lever, forcing the junction box off its mounting bolts. Thick yellow sparks arc-welded against the frame as 3 heavy copper feeder cables sheared in rapid succession. The 5 running tape decks shut down simultaneously, their iron flywheels grinding to a halt with a harsh metallic screech. The green indicator lamps on the master panel died, plunging the sub-basement into near-total darkness, illuminated only by the beam of Marcus's flashlight resting on the floor. The figure standing beside the rack locked its knee joints, its forward momentum vanishing as the electrical hum left the room. It collapsed sideways against the concrete pillar, spilling yards of magnetic audio tape out of its coat sleeves onto the floorboards. Marcus retrieved his leather specimen pouch, verifying that the 5 confiscated cassette tapes remained intact inside the zipped compartment. He swept his flashlight beam along the rear wall of the chamber, looking for an auxiliary exit route. Behind the dead tape rack stood a low-maintenance hatch marked with a red stencil reading, "Drainage Utility Access." Marcus unlatched the heavy iron dog bolts securing the panel, pulling the iron door outward on its hinges. Cold river air and the sharp smell of wet silt blew through the opening, confirming a direct connection to the canal drainage network outside. Marcus crawled into the narrow concrete culvert, dragging his flashlight and specimen pouch behind him. He navigated 40 yards of wet, rising pipe, pushing through 2 inches of stagnant drainage water until he reached a heavy iron security grate at the pipe's mouth. He used the flat end of his crowbar to drive out 2 rusted hinge pins, kicking the iron grate open into the heavy downpour outside. Marcus emerged onto the muddy embankment of the industrial canal, wiping rain from his eyes as he looked up at the dark outline of Station 4. 30 yards down the gravel access road, the engine of his unmarked cruiser was idling, its headlights piercing the dark rain. Despite Marcus having turned off the ignition and removed the key 40 minutes prior, Marcus scrambled up the slippery mud bank, keeping his sidearm drawn as he approached the driver's side of the cruiser. He reached down and pulled the driver's door handle. The door swung open smoothly, revealing the interior illuminated by the red glow of the dashboard instrument cluster. The key cylinder on the steering column was completely empty, yet the tachometer held steady at 800 revolutions per minute. Sitting on the passenger seat was the cruiser's 2-way radio microphone, its cord humming with power, emitting a crisp, high-frequency signal that vibrated through the vehicle's internal speakers. Marcus leaned into the cab, keeping his boots planted on the muddy gravel. He pointed his flashlight beam at the mobile digital terminal mounted to the right of the center console. The small monochrome screen was glowing green, printing out continuous lines of text despite the department's network having retired that terminal model 10 years ago. The dot matrix printer mounted below the screen fed out a narrow slip of thermal paper with a loud mechanical buzz. Marcus reached in, tore the slip from the feed tray, and held it under his flashlight beam. Printed on the paper were geographical coordinates leading 600 yards down the canal road to the canal repeater tower, accompanied by a single status line. Relay Tower 2 receiving Channel 6 transmission. Master recorder active. Marcus reached into the cruiser's cold cab, grabbed the heavy gear shift lever, and pulled it down firmly into drive. The transmission engaged with a heavy clunk, and the vehicle rolled slowly forward along the rutted canal levee. Rain hammered against the glass windshield in relentless waves, forcing Marcus to keep his left hand on the leather steering wheel while using his right hand to hold his tactical flashlight aimed through the wet glass. The 2-way radio console on the dash continued to hum, broadcasting a steady stream of atmospheric static punctuated by the rhythmic clicking of a mechanical relay switch. 500 yards down the muddy embankment, the structural frame of the canal repeater tower emerged from the roaring storm, its steel lattice rising 80 feet into the black night sky, topped by a flickering red aviation beacon. Marcus brought the cruiser to a halt beside the rusted chain-link perimeter fence. He grabbed his heavy tactical flashlight, his loaded service weapon, and the leather specimen pouch, stepping out into the cold mud. The heavy padlocked gate securing the enclosure had been severed with heavy bolt cutters, the rusted chain hanging loose against the wire mesh. Marcus pushed the gate open, its rusty hinges screaming loudly above the roar of the swollen river. He walked across the wet gravel yard toward the windowless concrete bunker housing the tower's primary transmission machinery. The reinforced steel entrance door sat slightly ajar, a thick black bundle of freshly laid coaxial cables snaking over the stone threshold and running directly into the interior dark. Marcus pushed the door open with the steel muzzle of his Glock 17, sweeping his light systematically across the freezing interior. The subterranean bunker was cold and damp, smelling of hot transformer oil, dry dust, and burnt copper wiring. 3 massive equipment racks lined the northern concrete wall, their vintage vacuum tubes glowing with a dull orange luminescence. In the center of the concrete floor sat a heavy cast iron audio recording chassis mounted inside a dust-sealed glass cabinet. Inside the cabinet, 2 massive 18-inch magnetic tape reels were spinning at high speed, feeding thick dark tape through an array of commercial broadcast heads. A heavy brass toggle switch on the front control panel was locked in the transmit position, its red warning lamp illuminating the glass enclosure. Marcus walked up to the main operator console, sweeping his flashlight beam across the broad desk surface. Resting on the wooden desk was a leather-bound logbook opened to the current date. Written on the broad page in fresh black ink were the exact vehicle mileage figures from Marcus's cruiser dashboard, recorded 10 minutes prior to his arrival. Hanging from the side of the console frame was a heavy rubber audio headset connected directly to the main broadcast monitor port. Marcus picked up the headset, holding one ear cup against his ear, while keeping his weapon aimed at the dark interior corners of the bunker. Through the headset, the radio channel burst into life with high-clarity emergency traffic. The voice coming over the speaker was not Arthur Sterling's, nor was it the voice of any officer from the 1994 file. It was the sharp, recognizable voice of Captain Miller, Marcus's current commanding officer at the regional headquarters. All district units, stand by for priority broadcast, Captain Miller's voice declared, speaking with flat operational urgency. Search crews have located Vehicle 402 submerged in the industrial canal adjacent to Station 4. Detective Marcus Vance has been recovered from the driver's seat. Medical examiner confirms time of death as 2:30 a.m. Marcus lowered the headset slowly, his grip tightening on the heavy iron frame until his knuckles turned white. He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out his department cell phone, and checked the screen. The digital device displayed no cellular signal, but the digital clock on the lock screen read exactly 2:30 a.m. Before he could move toward the exit door, a heavy iron hatch on the overhead maintenance catwalk slammed shut with a deafening bang that echoed off the concrete walls. A heavy steel deadbolt engaged from the outside with a sharp mechanical snap, locking the upper access ladder. Marcus raised his flashlight beam toward the catwalk railing 60 feet above. Standing behind the metal mesh was a dark silhouette holding a heavy iron audio recorder reel, its eyes reflecting the flashlight beam with a bright, glassy glare as it raised its left arm to pull the master power breaker. The red master breaker crashed down violently into its iron housing, instantly killing the overhead fluorescent lights inside the repeater bunker. A low, hollow hum filled the concrete room as the emergency battery backup system engaged, illuminating the transmission racks in a dull, pulsating red strobe. Marcus Vance brought his sidearm up, sweeping the front sight along the iron catwalk 60 feet overhead. The dark silhouette stood completely motionless beside the tension winch, its gloved hands resting on the heavy steel cable that ran upward into the hollow core of the tower lattice. Marcus moved quickly toward the open metal staircase at the rear of the room, his boots clattering against the perforated iron steps as he ascended 2 steps at a time, keeping his flashlight beam pinned on the upper platform. The figure above did not run away. It pulled a mechanical tension lever backward with a loud ratchet click. Outside, high above the roof, the structural steel lattice of the 80-foot tower groaned under sudden weight, twisting violently against the gale-force wind. Marcus reached the middle catwalk landing, unholstering his flashlight and jamming it into his coat pocket to free his left hand. He grabbed the cold steel handrail, leaning over the edge to fire 3 rounds at the winch assembly. The 9mm hollow point rounds struck the iron casing with loud metallic cracks, throwing bright yellow sparks across the platform. The hits severed the secondary drive belt, causing the heavy cable spool to spin completely out of control. The steel cable whipped across the catwalk, slicing through 2 high-voltage coaxial lines running along the concrete wall. Arcing electricity shot across the bunker ceiling, filling the air with the sharp scent of burnt rubber and ionized air. The dark figure turned slowly toward the stairs, dropping 5 feet onto the lower catwalk railing with mechanical precision. Marcus raised his steel crowbar, swinging the flat iron wedge directly at the figure's chest as it landed. The heavy iron bar struck the entity's collarbone with a solid metallic crunch, tearing through the heavy canvas jacket and revealing an internal frame constructed from copper ground straps and high-frequency radio transformers. The entity showed no reaction to the severe structural fracture. It lunged forward, grabbing Marcus's tactical vest with its left hand and driving him back against the iron safety rail. Marcus jammed the muzzle of his Glock into the figure's neck joint, pulling the trigger 3 times in rapid succession. The blast blew the joint apart, severing the heavy aircraft cable that connected the head assembly to the torso harness. The entity's grip slackened instantly, its knees buckling as it fell over the safety rail, crashing 60 feet down onto the concrete floor below. Marcus caught his breath, leaning against the cold steel railing while wiping rainwater and copper dust from his face. The master recording deck on the ground floor had stopped spinning, its 18-inch spools jammed by the fallen debris. However, the overhead transmission cables running up into the tower core were still vibrating with a high-pitched radio frequency. Marcus unclipped his heavy wire cutters from his belt, leaned over the catwalk frame, and severed the main signal cables feeding into the antenna array. The red strobe lights inside the bunker flickered twice and died completely. Silence returned to the subterranean concrete chamber, broken only by the sound of rain hammering against the corrugated steel roof. Marcus descended the iron stairs, retrieving his flashlight from the floor and checking the fallen figure beside the ruined tape deck. The crushed frame was empty of human remains. It consisted entirely of vintage broadcast equipment, copper shielding, and hundreds of feet of magnetic tape tangled around a brass police badge. Marcus picked up his leather specimen pouch and pushed open the heavy steel emergency exit door at the rear of the bunker. The door opened onto a raised concrete catwalk overlooking the canal lock system. 200 yards down the flooded levee, 3 emergency vehicles sat idling on the mud bank, their red and blue strobe lights casting long, flashing reflections across the churning black water. As Marcus stepped down onto the gravel path, his 2-way radio crackled on his belt. A voice spoke through the speaker, not over a recorded loop, but over a live emergency frequency. It was Captain Miller's voice, directing dive units to attach towing cables to a submerged vehicle at Lock 4. Marcus sprinted down the mud bank toward the floodlights, keeping his sidearm ready. The rain lashed against his face as he reached the perimeter of the recovery site. 2 heavy tow trucks were positioned near the concrete lock wall, their steel cables pulled taut into the dark water below. A team of 4 state police divers stood near the edge, guiding the electric winch controls as a dark mass broke the surface of the river. Marcus pushed past the yellow warning tape, shining his flashlight onto the wet roof of the vehicle rising from the mud. The license plate mounted on the rear bumper came into clear view under his light. State Police Plate 402, the exact plate attached to Marcus's own vehicle parked half a mile back. The heavy electric winch pulled the submerged cruiser onto the wet concrete apron of Lock 4. Water cascaded from the rusted frame, washing piles of river silt off the roof. Emergency strobe lights from 2 rescue trucks illuminated the scene in sharp red and blue flashes. None of the 4 police divers standing on the apron made a sound. They stood motionless beside the winch controls, their rubberized wetsuits glistening, faces hidden behind dark masks. Marcus Vance walked to the edge of the vehicle, stepping through puddles of diesel fuel and river water. He touched the cold, wet door pillar of the cruiser. The designation painted on the fender read 402, matching his assigned vehicle in every detail. Marcus looked through the driver's side window into an interior packed with mud and aquatic plants. The key cylinder on the steering column remained completely empty. Sitting on the passenger seat was his leather specimen pouch, its zipper open, its contents submerged. Marcus pulled the rear door open with a loud metallic latch pop. River water poured out, carrying empty specimen bags and shattered tape reels onto the concrete. He retrieved his tactical folding knife and stepped around to the rear of the cruiser. He jammed the blade into the mechanical keyway, twisting until the trunk popped open with a heavy snap. Inside sat an iron evidence chest identical to the safe he had opened in Vault 3. The heavy steel door was open slightly, revealing 6 metallic reel-to-reel spools in custom foam cutouts. 5 spools were marked with the badge numbers of the missing 1994 officers, their magnetic tape fully wound. The 6th cutout contained an active portable recording unit, its brass flywheel spinning steadily underwater. Marcus gripped the wet metal casing of the 6th recorder. As his fingers touched the aluminum, the unit emitted a clear audio signal that played through the water. A voice emerged from the waterproof speaker. It was Marcus's own voice, recording a detailed field report. The voice noted the rain, the time, and his exact physical condition as he stood beside the trunk. Marcus raised his knife to sever the internal drive belt running to the flywheel. Before the blade touched rubber, the 4 divers turned simultaneously toward the car. They stepped forward in unison, boots clicking against the pavement, forming a tight circle around the vehicle. Through the glass of their dive masks, Marcus saw no human eyes. The masks were filled with clear water, inside which small spools of magnetic tape spun on tiny brass spindles. Brown audio ribbon threaded directly through the eye sockets of the figures. The lead diver pointed his index finger at the specimen pouch on the front seat. Log entry 8, the lead diver stated. The voice did not originate from the man's throat. It broadcast from the portable recorder in Marcus's hands. Subject Marcus Vance has located vehicle 402. The physical record is 60% complete. Proceeding to secondary signal capture. The 4 divers took another synchronized step forward, closing the distance to the trunk. Marcus slammed the trunk lid down, locking the latch and unholstered his Glock. He fired 3 rounds into the chest of the lead diver. The bullets penetrated the synthetic suit, but no fluid emerged from the entry holes. High-pressure streams of river water and shredded magnetic tape burst from the punctures, spraying the hood. The lead diver did not stumble. He gripped the frame of the trunk lid with unnatural strength, prying the heavy steel panel upward. From inside the locked trunk, a sound began to ring out that made Marcus's blood run cold. The heavy Underwood typewriter had begun typing inside the sealed evidence chest. Its carriage struck the paper in rapid, violent bursts that vibrated through the car. Marcus backed away, sweeping his flashlight across the lock apron. The 2 idling tow trucks had no drivers, yet their massive engines roared in unison. Their drive shafts engaged, and both trucks rolled forward to crush the cruiser between their steel bumpers. Marcus turned toward the lock maintenance bridge, a narrow catwalk spanning the 100-foot gap above the open spillway gates. He scrambled up the iron access ladder as the 2 tow trucks slammed into the cruiser below with a massive crunch. A loud explosion rocked the apron as the cruiser's fuel tank ruptured, sending a wave of burning gasoline across the concrete. From the burning wreckage, the portable recorder continued to broadcast Marcus's voice across the river valley. It recited his exact coordinates, his heart rate, and the step-by-step progression of his retreat across the bridge. As Marcus reached the midpoint of the catwalk, the steel access gate at the far end swung shut. Its heavy padlock snapped locked on its own as a dark figure stepped out of the shadows on the far bank. The figure stood perfectly still in the rain, holding a master control key tightly in its hand. Marcus Vance stood on the narrow steel catwalk of the lock maintenance bridge, 40 feet above the roaring spillway of Lock 4. Rain lashed his face in cold, violent sheets, blowing spray across the wet iron handrails. At the far end of the span, the figure standing by the security gate did not move. It wore a heavy vinyl trench coat, its face shadowed beneath the brim of a wet service cap. In its right hand, the figure held a brass master key attached to a heavy iron ring. In its left, it cradled an active reel-to-reel deck that hummed loudly through the storm. Below the catwalk, the two driverless tow trucks rammed the submerged cruiser once more, their heavy steel frames buckling the car's body panels until the fuel tank ignited in a sudden, brilliant burst of orange fire. The glare illuminated the figure at the gate, casting its shadow long and distorted across the metal deck. Marcus raised his Glock 17, aligning the front sight directly with the gate's heavy padlock assembly. He pulled the trigger twice. The heavy 9mm rounds shattered the rusted iron shackle, sending fragments flying into the darkness. The gate swung open with a loud metallic screech under the force of the wind. Marcus charged forward across the slippery iron grates, his boots creating a rhythmic clatter that echoed over the rush of the river. The figure at the gate did not draw a weapon or attempt to flee. As Marcus closed the distance, the entity slowly lifted its head, exposing a worn leather faceplate secured with thick copper rivets. Etched into the brass badge pinned to its lapel were the numbers 4, 0, and 2, the exact badge number assigned to Detective Marcus Vance. Marcus did not hesitate. He swung his heavy iron crowbar with all his strength, driving the flat wedge into the side of the figure's neck. The blow tore through the vinyl fabric, shearing a cluster of copper-ground wires and heavy steel aircraft cables. Yellow electrical sparks exploded from the damaged joint, filling the wet air with the sharp stench of ozone and scorched insulation. The figure reeled backward against the bridge rail, its left arm snapping at the elbow as the portable reel-to-reel recorder crashed onto the catwalk grates. Marcus stepped in, driving his shoulder into the entity's chest, forcing the heavy frame over the waist-high iron railing. The figure flipped backward, tumbling 40 feet through the darkness before hitting the churning black water of the spillway with a massive splash. Marcus scooped up the fallen recorder from the grates. The brass spools were dented from the impact, but the brown magnetic tape continued to feed smoothly through the heads, broadcasting a low-frequency hum. Marcus turned toward the concrete bunker set into the limestone cliff face beside the lock gates. The heavy steel access door was marked with a weathered sign reading, "Subterranean Lockmaster Controls, authorized personnel only." The iron handle yielded under his hand, swinging inward to reveal a flight of wet granite steps descending into the dark foundation of the dam. Marcus drew his flashlight, illuminating the narrow stone stairwell as he descended 40 feet beneath the canal bed. The temperature inside the shaft dropped rapidly, and the ambient noise of the rain was replaced by the deep, rhythmic thumping of industrial hydraulic pumps. At the bottom of the stairs, Marcus entered a wide subterranean vault lined with vintage copper conduit and massive iron water pipes. In the center of the hall stood the lockmaster's primary control console, a massive assembly of brass switches, pressure gauges, and telegraph relays. Mounted directly above the main water control levers was a wall-sized patch panel containing hundreds of heavy telephone jacks, linking the canal facility directly to the County Sheriff Department's emergency communications grid. Rerouted through the patch panel were dozens of fresh black coaxial cables, all feeding into a central distribution amplifier. Standing in front of the console were 3 metal storage racks loaded with vintage reel-to-reel tape decks. The heavy reels turned in slow, silent synchronization, their brown magnetic ribbons weaving through intricate networks of brass guide rollers. Marcus approached the central rack, shining his light onto the paper index cards slotted into the metal label holders. Each card listed the name, rank, and badge number of every active officer currently assigned to the regional police department. Above Marcus's own name, the red indicator lamp was glowing solid, indicating an active recording session. As Marcus reached out to cut the master input cable, the internal speakers inside the patch panel crackled, broadcasting a loud data tone that shook the moisture from the concrete ceiling. The high-frequency data tone piercing through the patch panel speakers dropped an octave, settling into a low, resonant drone that vibrated through the limestone floor. Marcus Vance gripped his heavy iron crowbar, stepping past the rows of spinning reel-to-reel tape decks toward the main operator desk in the center of the vault. Resting on the steel desk surface was a leather-bound administrative ledger bearing the seal of the State Department of Public Safety, dated August 1994. Beside the ledger sat a heavy brass desktop microphone connected directly to the central patch panel by thick, rubber-insulated wiring. Marcus flipped open the ledger's hardcover, turning through pages of handwritten technical schematics that detailed an unauthorized signal capture project designated Operation Archive. The project documents revealed that Precinct Station 4 had not been destroyed by a routine structural fire. The facility had been deliberately isolated and burned to conceal a subterranean signal array constructed beneath the canal bed. The system had been designed to intercept emergency radio frequencies, map the vocal patterns of active duty officers, and store their consciousness onto high-density magnetic audio reels. Arthur Sterling had not been a victim of a sudden heart attack. He was the primary test subject whose physical voice had been permanently bound into the station's analog recording loop 32 years ago. Every officer who had investigated the site since 1994 had been lured into the subterranean network, their identities systematically overwritten and archived within the metallic spools lining the vault. Marcus looked up from the ledger, shining his flashlight beam toward the rear wall of the chamber. Mounted inside a recessed brick alcove stood the facility's primary power supply, a three-phase, oil-insulated transformer enclosure rated at 440 volts. Heavy copper bus bars emerged from the top of the transformer, feeding raw electrical current into the transmission racks through open, uninsulated knife switches. Marcus realized that severing individual signal cables would not shut down the system. The master archive operated on a self-sustaining loop powered by the lock's hydroelectric turbine generator. To break the signal lock, he needed to trigger a catastrophic short circuit that would destroy the main distribution transformer and incinerate the magnetic tape stock. Marcus stepped up to the transformer alcove, raising his iron crowbar with both hands. He jammed the flat steel wedge between the high-voltage bus bars, driving the tool forward with all the force left in his body. A blinding flash of blue-white electrical light erupted from the contact point, accompanied by a thunderous explosion that blew the glass pressure gauges off the wall panel. Arc welding heat instantly vaporized the iron crowbar's tip, throwing a shower of molten metal across the vault floor. The intense thermal discharge ignited the dry paper index cards and plastic tape spools on the nearest rack, sending thick clouds of black, chemical smoke billowing toward the stone ceiling. The three metal storage racks groaned as their internal drive motors shorted out. The magnetic tapes began to melt and snap under the intense heat, screeching through the monitor speakers like screaming human voices as the physical media disintegrated. Marcus backed away from the flames, shielding his eyes from the blinding electrical arcing that continued to surge across the bus bars. However, despite the destruction of the secondary tape racks, the master distribution panel in the center of the room remained energized, its red indicator lamps burning with a hot, unyielding radiance through the black smoke. The wall-mounted patch panel speaker burst into life once more, broadcasting a crystal-clear dispatch message through the roaring flames. The voice coming over the speaker was Marcus Vance's own voice, reading a formal administrative notice with absolute, cold efficiency. Priority notification for all district units, the recorded voice declared. Subject Marcus Vance has completed the physical transition cycle at 2:45 a.m. Physical records successfully archived to master Reel 7. Secondary units dispatched to clear the surface site. Before Marcus could move toward the granite stairwell exit, a heavy hydraulic latch beneath the operator desk disengaged with a sharp metallic clack. The central steel floor plate beneath his boots buckled under sudden pressure, tilting downward at a 45-degree angle into the black abyss of the primary turbine shaft. Marcus lunged forward, his fingers clawing desperately at the hot edge of the concrete deck, but the slick, oil-covered stone offered no handhold. He slid into the dark vertical shaft, suspended over the churning iron blades of the subterranean water wheel, while from the absolute darkness 50 feet below, a massive new tape reel began to spin with a high-pitched mechanical whine. The plunge through the dark core of the turbine shaft ended not with an impact against hydraulic blades, but with a hard, sliding drop onto a wet iron catwalk suspended 20 feet above the churning floodwaters. Cold river mist blasted through the steel floor grates, soaking Detective Marcus Vance as he scrambled to his feet, gripping the slippery railing with bruised hands. Below him, the massive iron paddles of the 19th century turbine turned with a thunderous groan, driving the underground generator that fed electrical power into the foundation of the subterranean complex. Heavy black smoke from the burning transformer vault above surged through the ventilation grates, filling the lower chamber with dense fumes. Marcus swept the dim beam of his cracked tactical flashlight across the damp masonry, locating an emergency spiral staircase bolted to the curved limestone wall. He climbed the narrow iron stairs, his boots creating a rhythmic ringing that synced with the mechanical pulse of the generator below. The staircase rose toward an isolated subchamber built directly beneath the concrete floor of the main canal lock, a room sealed behind a heavy bronze pressure door bearing the stamped seal of the 1994 State Police Communications Division. The bronze hatch stood wide open, exposing an inner sanctum illuminated by a pale blue glow emanating from a glass-enclosed vacuum chamber in the center of the room. Resting inside the vacuum housing was a colossal gold-plated tape reel 4 feet in diameter, spinning on a frictionless magnetic spindle at incredible velocity. The tape feeding through the heavy beryllium recording heads was a dark, liquid compound that pulsed with light as it recorded incoming data signals. Marcus stepped into the sanctum, his hand instinctively dropping to his holster, only to find his service weapon missing, lost during the fall through the open floor plate. On the steel workbench adjacent to the glass chamber sat a vintage broadcast console fitted with high-gain signal meters and a heavy ceramic cutoff switch wired directly into the main transmission line. As Marcus approached the console, the high-gain meters spiked violently into the red zone, and the intercom speaker mounted above the glass casing hummed to life. The audio monitor did not broadcast static. It played a crisp, perfectly clean audio feed of Captain Miller speaking at the surface recovery site above the lock. Search and rescue units have secured Vehicle 402. Captain Miller's recorded voice declared through the speaker, his tone flat and devoid of emotion. The body of Detective Marcus Vance has been extracted from the driver's seat and verified by county medical examiners. All physical evidence related to Case File 89B is secured. Initiate final archiving protocol on Channel 6. Marcus stared at the spinning gold reel inside the vacuum housing, watching as thin strands of the glowing liquid compound wove themselves onto the take-up spool, forming intricate patterns that mirrored the wave structures of a human voice print. He looked down at his own arms, noticing that his skin had lost its warm, organic flush, taking on the pale, translucent hue of a figure viewed through old photographic film. Realizing that his physical presence was rapidly decoupling from the material world, Marcus grabbed a heavy iron wrench resting on the workbench shelf. He stepped up to the glass vacuum enclosure, raised the tool above his head, and brought it down with all his remaining strength against the center of the reinforced pane. The glass shattered with an implosive pop, exposing the spinning golden spools to the ambient atmosphere of the underground room. The sudden rush of humid air disrupted the vacuum seal, causing the liquid recording compound to flash freeze into brittle ribbons that snapped against the beryllium heads with sharp metallic cracks. The high-frequency hum echoing through the concrete chamber dropped into a dying pitch as the giant golden reel ground to a sudden halt on its spindle. The destruction of the master reel triggered a violent chain reaction through the room's electrical grid. Arcs of blue electricity jumped from the broken vacuum housing to the surrounding metal control racks, vaporizing copper-ground wires and shattering vacuum tubes in rapid succession. The pale blue light flared into a brilliant white flash before dying out completely, plunging the subterranean sanctum into absolute darkness. As the mechanical roar of the turbine generator below began to fade into a quiet whisper, Marcus felt the physical weight of his body dissolve entirely. His lingering consciousness lifted into the swirling air currents of the concrete vault as the final analog frequency collapsed into silence. The official final report submitted by the State Police Internal Affairs Bureau in November 1994 recorded the total loss of Precinct Station 4 as a catastrophic structural collapse caused by an uncontained basement fire, resulting in the presumed death of Detective Marcus Vance, whose patrol vehicle was recovered from the flooded lock channel 3 days after the storm. Case File 89B was formally retired from the department's active archives, its remaining paperwork sealed inside a galvanized iron container and transferred to the secondary storage vaults beneath the state capitol in Albany, where it sat untouched for over 3 decades. The physical ruins of Station 4 were demolished by county crews in the spring of 1995. The scorched foundation capped under 5 feet of reinforced concrete and forgotten beneath the fast-growing pine thickets along the canal bank. The 5 missing officers were officially listed as victims of structural entrapment, their service records closed without further administrative inquiry. In the late autumn of 2026, an independent audio engineer named Sarah Chun was hired by the Regional Historical Commission to survey obsolete analog radio frequencies along the Great Lakes Rust Belt. Operating from a mobile laboratory van parked along the old canal levee, Sarah utilized high-sensitivity spectrum analyzers to catalog ghost transmissions and unmapped emergency relay signals left behind by abandoned municipal infrastructure. The autumn rain fell in steady, quiet curtains against the roof of her vehicle, mirroring the historical weather logs recorded during the night of Vance's disappearance 32 years prior. On the night of October 14th, Sarah's automated spectrum monitors picked up a persistent narrowband signal broadcasting on 89.4 FM, a frequency band that had remained officially unassigned by federal communications authorities for over 40 years. The signal did not originate from any active commercial tower, relay array, or modern digital cell site. According to the directional telemetry displayed across Sarah's high-resolution monitors, the transmission emanated from a localized point deep beneath the reinforced concrete cap of the old Station 4 foundation. Sarah adjusted her receiver controls, routing the incoming transmission through a multi-stage digital noise reduction filter to clean up the heavy atmospheric static lingering on the line. Through the high-fidelity studio monitor speakers mounted inside the van, a quiet, pristine audio recording emerged from the white noise. It was the calm, steady voice of Arthur Sterling, speaking as a dispatcher on a routine midnight shift, reciting standard patrol check-ins from the autumn of 1994. As Sarah listened to the vintage broadcast, a secondary voice entered the audio feed. A sharp, authoritative voice identifying itself as Detective Marcus Vance, Badge 402. Vance's recorded voice did not address a dispatcher or file a routine incident report. It spoke directly to anyone monitoring the frequency in the future, providing a precise operational warning regarding the subterranean vault beneath the canal lock. To any unit monitoring this channel, Vance's voice declared over the soft hum of pristine magnetic tape noise. The capture sequence has been permanently locked down. Do not open the vault door. Do not engage the recording heads. The signal loop terminates here. The clarity of his tone was absolute, completely free of distortion, as if the recording had been mastered inside a soundproof chamber moments prior. Sarah leaned closer to the audio console, tapping her touchscreen interface to save the raw broadcast file to her permanent storage drive. As the digital counter reached 3 minutes, the transmission did not fade into static or restart its opening loop. Instead, the audio feed carried the clear, distinct sound of a heavy steel deadbolt clicking securely into place inside an empty room, followed by the quiet, rhythmic ticking of a mechanical desk clock that continued to play without interruption into the rain-soaked night. Sarah pressed the save button, finalizing the digital archive file, and looked out the van window toward the dark timberline. Standing at the edge of the abandoned concrete cap, bathed in the dim red glow of her vehicle's taillights, stood the dark, motionless silhouette of an officer in a vinyl rain jacket, watching the canal road in total silence until the heavy rain swallowed his figure whole. If this file kept you awake tonight, leave a comment below with your thoughts, or share your own encounter. Until next time, pleasant nightmares.